What is the very best, most fantabulous, most awesomest thing you can do for your health? I laugh about most awesomest because many years ago I dated a girl and she used to say most awesomest. And I think that was the beginning of the end for our relationship. This will not win me any popularity contest for saying that. Uh, but it was a turnoff. It was just very poor grammar. Um, don't say most awesomest. Okay. But what if we had to choose only one thing to do for our health? What would it be? The most candid answer is I don't know. It depends who you ask, right? If you ask health experts, there are obviously the people who are in the food camp. There are obviously the people who are in the exercise camp. There are in the people who are in the nutritional supplements camp. You will find people in the sun camp. Not sun per se, but really has to do with our biological clocks, right? And how it relates to the cycle of light that occurs during the day. So you will find all kinds of camps. If you ask what is the number one best thing that you can do for your health, I am going to make a case today without having complete conviction. Walking. All right. Let's talk a little bit about walking. If you Googled walking, by the way, let me digress. Wednesday starts Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year. So a sincere, happy, and healthy New Year for both people who are Jewish and celebrate, and for people who do not celebrate. We're supposed to have a sweet and prosperous and healthy New Year. And we wish that every year. And this year, let's see it be the case. Okay? And towards that end, let me make my argument for walking consistently. All right. If you were to Google the topic, you would see all kinds of health benefits from all kinds of experts. You would find articles by the, Harvard School of Medicine. You would find articles by individual health practitioners. And you would read about some of the various benefits. So let me give you some simple examples. Heart health. The American Heart Association recommends walking on a consistent basis. Okay. Most people who recommend walking, they do not recommend doing it inconsistently. They recommend doing it on a consistent basis. So you'll hear different ideas. We'll talk about duration in a bit, but generally you hear at least 5 times a week. So it's obviously good for the heart. Why? Well, when you're walking, your heart is pumping, but you're not pushing yourself that much. You're not stressing your heart that much in case there's a problem. In the meantime, as a result of the heart pumping more, the blood flow increases. It goes to your muscles. The transportation of nutrients increases. So there are a lot of good reasons why walking is good for your cardiovascular system. Walking is also terrific for your immune system. And studies have shown that if you walk a half hour a day, 5 days a week, and that, by the way, is the general recommendation. I said we would get into the recommendations for duration and frequency. We might as well do that right now. You will hear, to walk for at least 11 minutes a day. That 11 minutes a day has shown various benefits. So at the very least, you can do that. You will hear walk for 45 minutes to an hour a day. 10,000 steps. You might hear 5 miles. 10,000 steps equates to approximately 5 miles. Now, there is an age component, right? If you are younger, then you are better off doing the 10,000 steps. If you're a little bit older, you are fine with 5,000 steps. So if you're listening to me, if you're 85 years old, you should probably aim for 5,000 steps if you are going to track it. Me personally, I have been very reluctant to track my steps. I should probably jump in. Someone told me that I don't need one of those fancy watches, that my phone already has it in the phone. How that works, I don't know, but I'm impressed. So I might as well just turn that on. I think there's something to be said for that kind of automatic accountability, for that tracking. At the very least, it's interesting. You can see metrics about it. You can see graphs. So I think I need to do that. That's an action step for me. Someone write that down and hold me accountable, please. Okay. So in order to get the benefits, you want to walk, let's just call it, for most people, anywhere from a half hour to an hour, 5 times per week. And it's okay to walk daily. Walking is very good for digestion. Now, how many of you remember having grandparents and after dinner they would take a walk? It seemed to be a thing. And actually, walking seemed to be a bigger thing in our culture years ago. Let's consider some of the most famous streets in the world, some of the most famous thoroughfares. Broadway in New York. There is a street in Barcelona called the Rambles. Now think about it. That's where we get the word ramble. And I think ramble just means to kind of walk without necessarily having a direction. I should look that up. I don't know that that's the exact definition, but that's what I get from it. Okay. But the idea, and there's other streets, the Champs-Élysées, I think about New York, Fifth Avenue. How about Ocean Parkway? For those of you from Brooklyn, look how some of these streets are designed. Park Avenue, they're almost designed for walking. They're almost like lengthy parks, right? Not a lot of width, but lengthy parks that are designed for walking, that are designed for passing your neighbors and saying hello. I mean, walking seemed to be a bigger part of the culture. And as I was saying, it seems like our grandparents used to go and take a walk after they ate. My grandparents lived on another famous thoroughfare, Queens Boulevard. One set of grandparents lived on Queens Boulevard. The other lived 2 blocks from Kings Highway. So we had the Kings and Queens covered there, right, for the Queens and Brooklyn grandparents. But also 2 really famous thoroughfares where people would walk. And of course, later on, especially with Queens Boulevard, driving became the primary mode. But older people knew this intuitively. They didn't need some, big doctor to tell them that walking was good for them, especially for digestion. They knew intuitively to do it, and to do it after dinner. I remember going on those walks, and studies, of course, show that it is good for digestion. So walking, whether it be for cardiovascular health, whether it be for weight loss or weight maintenance, it obviously has benefits for that. You're burning calories. You're not burning a hell of a lot of calories, right? I think a half hour, depending on how much you weigh, is going to be 130 to 200 calories, something like that. I could be wrong about those stats, okay? I always try to be accurate and tell you if I'm not sure, if I'm just trying to remember it correctly. So you're not going to burn that much from walking, but still you're going to burn some. And between those benefits, the added tone in musculature, right? Walking itself will not make you a He-Man or woman. I don't know that he-woman is a thing, but you get the idea. It will only add so much muscle, but it will contribute to muscle tone. So between those benefits of nutrient transport, of blood flow, of building some muscular tone, of burning some calories. So these will all help in the process of digestion as well, of losing weight or keeping weight off. It won't do it in and of itself, right? You still have to be mindful of what goes into your mouth, but it definitely assists. So these are some of the many benefits of walking, but I'd like to point out what I believe might be the number one. There is a health expert out there, and he talks about walking, but he doesn't talk about it for any of these physical benefits. He talks about it purely for emotional, mental, spiritual benefits. And this is what he says. His argument is that, and by the way, I am going to not say what he said verbatim. I'm going to add my own opinion into this, right? So I will be editorializing a bit and sort of summarizing, but I think it's still valid. Okay, so his point of view is this. Today's world, the modern world, is very introverting. Okay? Let's talk about this phenomenon of introversion. Introversion very simply means inward focus. Okay. Now, introversion can be taken to an extreme. It can, there are different layers like anything else. But introversion on the whole is not an ideal thing. Now, it is good to be in touch with your thoughts and your emotions, but to have the focus be inward too much is ultimately not a good thing. Why? Well, because the mind can be kind of a cesspool, right? When we introvert, we tend to look inward, but not see what's wonderful about ourselves and not see reality. But it's to introvert is to become immersed in a very subjective universe. And subjectively, there is a lot of negative thoughts and fears and anxieties and beliefs, etc. A person can introvert to the point where they're not dealing with outward reality and where their ability to communicate with other people is really denigrated. So introversion on a long-term basis and when it's to a great degree is not a good thing. We all know people who are very introverted, and maybe they're not doing so well because of that. Now, the mechanisms of becoming introverted, there are many, but one of them is just our modern lifestyle. You can look at today's world and see it as a big introversion machine. Much of what we are confronted with adds to our introversion. Now, consider this medium from which we are communicating right now. I am speaking into this computer, so my attention is about 1.5 feet away from this computer, if that much. And I do this for much of the day. Whereas if you go back some years before computers, people's focus was not 1.5 feet away. Their focus was on a field, let's say, if they were farmers or worked in agriculture somehow. Okay, the focus was further away, right? As great as the access is that modern technology allows, as the internet allows, right? It allows me to see across the world. On the other hand, it allows me to see everything through a screen. Our phones, even worse. Okay, so our focal points are getting closer and closer. That in and of itself is very introverting. And if you do it too much, you become blurry-eyed. And you tend to get stuck in your head, or it is stuck no further away than the device. It can be very fixating. And again, the stuff that we're confronting with often is just very, very negative, whether that be news or whether that be, all the crap on social media, or whether it be what's in our own heads again, which tends to go that way the more we're introverted. Now, the opposite of introversion is extroversion. Extroversion is outward focus, right? It's where the focus is on the physical world that's around us, right? Some people might call it reality because it is a less subjective world. It is a more objective world. Most of us can agree that a tree is a tree, right? We're looking at stuff of substance. We're not just looking at thoughts and feelings and fears and anxieties that are all kind of have a lot of meaning, but no actual substance. These things aren't as real. They are much more open to interpretation, which, as we were saying, all too often goes towards negativity. Yeah. You ever notice that, by the way? It's not all the time, but often, if you're looking for answers, like why didn't something turn out, right? How many of us have made the mistake of evaluating our lives? Don't do that if you can help it. You turn a certain age, you have a birthday, and then you think to yourself, oh, I thought at this point I would be doing such and such, but I'm not. Why? Well, all too often it's because of the world sucks, or you suck, or your parents weren't nice to you, or the answers that we tend to get when we look inside in that way, as I said, can and often do skew towards the negative. I would submit that the more introverted you are, the more negative you're going to be. So it's not that introverting isn't good at times and purposeful, right? We have to think. Sometimes we have to live here a little bit, but chronically and to a great degree, that's too often where we go. The other thing is that can be exhausting. When you're dealing with a very subjective universe, that is very tiring and exhausting. Now, on the other hand, when we are dealing with the objective universe and the reality of it, that can be introverting in and of itself, right? If we see something we don't want to see, for example, something that's difficult to confront, well, then we might go into our heads, right? It might be reminiscent of something that we experience. For example, if we see a car accident, that could cause extroversion. But the fact is, introversion. But the fact is that the outside world, the objective reality, is where most of our attention should be. And it's not as exhausting. And if you're really looking at it, it's generally not that negative. It's generally kind of neutral. It is what it is. The only thing negative about a tree is your associations with it. So the better state to be in is a state of extroversion. Now, let's bring this full circle back around to walking. The remedy for introversion, one of the best remedies for it, introversion and all of its attendant issues, anxiety and depression and the things that are associated with it, is extroversion, obviously. And one of the best ways to extrovert is simply to walk, right? As we are getting in our physiological fix, so getting the blood pumping and getting the nutrients going and, all of those good things that are happening to our bodies, we also have the opportunity to focus our attention on the outside world, to bring the attention from here out to there, where we're dealing less with those ideas and those things that are purely made up of meaning, meaning which we give it, and all too often, once again, can skew negative. And it just puts our attention on where we are. Now, a couple of points about this. If we're going to do this, the best way to do it is while we're walking to look at those things, to look at the buildings and the trees and the clouds and what have you. Because the tendency is that we will get stuck in that introverted state, even while we are outside in that objective reality. But if we do it enough, if we walk as long as it takes and focus outwards, eventually our attention will extrovert. And then a miraculous thing can happen. You can realize that you're breathing again. You can realize that things may not be so bad after all, or that there are solutions. All right? You can become enthusiastic again. So this is the argument for walking and doing it a particular way. Now, the other point about walking in this way is it's not done primarily for exercise. That becomes the side effect. The main focus is to do it as an intentional mental process. So when your body is telling you, well, I don't want to walk, well, you get to tell it, no, you're going to walk. You're going to move. You need to move. And this is one of the primary benefits of walking for this purpose. Not just for the benefits of your physiology, not just to move, but to get moving, to get out of your head, to use your body to carry you around, odd as that sounds, to help you to extrovert, to get into that better, healthier state. This is one of the reasons actually why people love exercising, because it takes their attention from the inside to the outside. For those who you know are addicted to exercise, for those who you know are runners and they get runner's high, this is probably one of the mechanisms. So besides the endorphins that are released, those are those happy chemicals, right? And they can be released from walking as well. Besides from the endorphins and from that feeling of accomplishing something and the blood flow that's going on, if you're running, if you're outside in nature, it's very much doing what we were talking about doing while walking. That's true of other exercises as well, right? If you're on a field and you're engaging in a game, well, again, you're focusing on the goals of the game. You're focusing on the field itself, on the opposition, on your own teammates, and there's just not a lot of time to think those negative thoughts. God, that the pandemic, one of the reasons it was so unhealthful was because there was a lot of time. It was extremely introverting. There was the time, and there was the increasingly narrower focus as you were viewing the world through your screens. So this is the argument for the necessity of walking, of doing it in a particular intentional kind of way. This is also the argument about why walking may be the most healthy thing that you can do for yourself, because when done in this manner, and again, I am kind of summarizing the thoughts and the research of this one particular expert, when done in this manner, it is a holistic fix. It is a way to get a different perspective on the universe. Okay? It is a very effective method of stress control because it allows you to get outside of the stress, which exists, again, internally, and maximize when you're inwardly focused. It is probably the case that kids today are more anxious and more depressed. You hear this. I think that it is probably objectively true. And the main mechanism of that is probably introversion, because of exactly what we're talking about now, because of how they're interfacing with the world from closer and closer and closer, like that. So if you have children, who are introverted, let them listen to this and insist that they get out there and they walk and they look at things that are outside of them, and they do it as again, the physical exercise in this way of looking at it is secondary. And it comes inevitably. You can't help it. You don't have to focus on the physical exercise to get the benefits of the physical exercise. But when it's made into a mental process for this purpose, you get both. So this has become very serious. Not my intention. Okay. I'm going to end off here. I hope you understand. If you have any questions about this, this is the main method of quote unquote therapy that I recommend when my clients come in and they are in a bad state. Get out and walk. Now, the problem is when people are in a bad state, they don't necessarily appreciate these kind of mechanisms and the magic that it can have. If it's done for long enough and often enough, it can be, nothing's a panacea, but it can be a panacea. It can be a practically a cure-all. Okay, so that's it for today, everyone. As I said before, have a happy, healthy, sweet new year. We're just going to call it New Year. We'll have another New Year coming up in a few months, but it's nice to celebrate as many as you can, I suppose. And we'll speak to you next week.